Purpose of this presentation is to set the record straight on the three most frequent questions being raised, which Mr. McGovern just alluded to earlier. Number one, is the city compliant with its own wage escalation policy? Number two, how does the city's offer benchmark to other work groups? And number three, does the city have slush funds? So on this graph, in one snapshot, you see the reason for which we have the wage escalation policy, the reason why it was developed. The orange line in the graph is the city's annual tax base growth. All other lines on that graph that you see before you are each employee wage packages from 2014 to 2019, including management, inside workers, outside workers, police and fire. As you can see on the graph, wage increases for all employees groups between 2014 and 2019 outpaced the city's tax base growth, which is in orange, which resulted in an unsustainable business model, causing a structural deficit that led to emergency short-term provincial financial assistance and inevitably a significant workforce restructuring in 2020. So the wage escalation policy was approved on September 23rd, 2019. The primary purpose of the wage escalation policy was to ensure the city spins within its means by ensuring that wages and benefits do not cause either a tax rate increase or a reduction in service levels. What you have on the slide is excerpts right from the policy. So subsection 4.2 of the wage escalation policy describes how this policy is to be applied. It is the application section of the policy. The policy was authored by my department. The application section of the policy does not direct or mandate staff to offer a prescribed formula to employee groups. However, it does mandate staff to ensure the city's overall wage and benefit budget is directed or mandated to not exceed a cap that's formulated and set forth in the policy. As you can see in the wording on the slide, the word budget is bolded as that word is used throughout the application section of the wage escalation policy, referring to the wage and benefit budget for the city. This does not mean the policy creates a budget floor where the city must spend the maximum amount of the wage escalation policy. It is a budget ceiling that ensures that the wage escalation policy cap on the budget is not exceeded. This is important, as the city needs the flexibility to allocate budget where it makes the most sense, given the goals set forth in the 10-year strategic plan, the need to invest in growth readiness projects, to be competitive in tax rate, and to have flexibility to pivot when economic conditions change to ensure the long-term financial plan targets are met. So the answer to the first question is the city compliant with the wage escalation policy? The answer is yes, and this is how it's calculated. In the middle section of the slide, you'll see the tax base increase for the years 2023, 2022, and 2021. The wage escalation policy rate is simply the average of the 3 years of the tax base, which equates to 5.35%. This is then compared to CPI plus 1, because the policy mandates the cap of the policy to be the lower of both numbers for the next budget year. To ensure we use the most relevant CPI number, because it is for the following year's budget, we use the New Brunswick CPI figure for September year over year, which is released around the same time as our assessment-based information is released in mid-October. So compliance and testing compliance with the policy is quite simple. It's calculated by looking at the year-over-year percentage increase in the wage and benefit budget for the city, not by group, as you can see at the top, to ensure the calculation is below the wage escalation policy limit. You can see the 2023 wage and benefit budget was compliant with an increase over budget of 2022 by 5.304%, below the wage escalation policy limit of 5.35%. The wage escalation policy budget cap has to absorb more than just the annual wage escalation. It has to absorb increases in staff. It has to absorb new positions in the establishment, in not only permanent but casual, increased overtime cost, increased costs associated with fringe benefits, increased pension cost, promotional increase, and step and group increases that occur throughout the year for employees. This is why the policy is not a budget floor. The city needs the flexibility to run its business and additional payroll costs to support service objectives. The last section of the policy sets out the roles and responsibility of council, Finance Committee, and the CFO actually in this section. CUPE is misinterpreting subsection 5.1.2 of the wage escalation policy that states that it's council's role to not only approve the policy, but as well as to direct staff to use it when negotiating future contracts. The intent of 5.1.2 is to ensure staff use the wage escalation cap to budget accordingly so that wage and benefit envelopes are well understood when negotiating wage packages within a union, or in some cases, multiple unions simultaneously in the same year. There's only so much money in the pot, so to speak, and the policy provides a line of sight to that envelope through the wage escalation policy so that negotiating teams know exactly what the city's affordability limits are. And before I get into benchmarking, I do want to make one final point on the wage escalation policy. This slide shows wage settlements for employee groups from 2020 to 2023, all while a period of time where the wage escalation policy was in full effect, including for management, police, local 18, and fire. During this period, some negotiated agreements included 0%, even though the wage escalation policy limit was higher, as is the case of management and local 18 in the years 2021 and 2022, circled on the table. And in other cases, employee groups received wage packages that were either below or above the wage escalation policy. City was compliant with its wage escalation policy in all of these years. I've also heard that management received 5.35% in 2023. However, if you take over a 3-year period, the previous 2 years management received 2 zeros, and the 3-year average for management is 1.78%. In the case of Local 18, the wage escalation policy was negotiated into the final 2 years of the contract. However, the city chose to do so, creating flexibility with a reduction in the minimum number by 43 positions and reducing the overall wage and benefit budget. In addition, in that agreement, the wage escalation formula was only for the final 2 years of the agreement, and both parties took risks given the rate was well into the future and unknown, as opposed to a scenario where the wage escalation rate is already known and there is no risk to ask for it. So now on to benchmarking. The city's July 26 5-year offer to CUPE Local 486 is before you on the slide in green. This was released by the city, includes a $5,000 one-time payment to all 143 employees in 2022. That cost approximately $710,000, followed by 5.35% in 2023, which is equivalent to the approved wage escalation policy rate, as well as 2.1% in 2024 and 2025, and 2.25% in the final year, 2026. This slide presents what the Local 486 maximum salaries for groups 4 to 9 would be if the city offer were to be accepted for the years 2022 to 2026. So the maximum current salaries are presented in the column for the year 2021. That's the current maximum salaries in the expired agreement in the column 2021. If we look at the low and the high on that salary table, for example, a group 4 position, such as for a position such as administrative assistant, the maximum salary in this group for group 4 would be $52,701 in 2021. And based on the city's offer, it would increase to $59,179 by 2026. On the other end of the spectrum, if looking at the maximum salary for group 9 position, as in the case of an accounting supervisor or a network specialist, the maximum salary for that group would increase from $78,336 in 2021 to $87,965 in 2026. And as you all know, fringe benefit costs are expensive. They cost the city approximately 25% of overall salaries are the cost of fringe benefits. And employee benefits are important as part of any employee contract. Important to acknowledge key benefits in the CUPE 486 agreement. I'm just going to read a few of those benefits out. So first and foremost, there's a 35-hour work week. However, time beyond 35 hours is paid at overtime rates. Or as time off in lieu. There's also 13 paid statutory holidays. The members can accrue up to 7 weeks or 245 hours of paid vacation leave annually on completing 25 years of service. An additional 14 hours of flexible paid time off exists in the contract for flex time. There's up to 35 hours of paid time off to care for family members in the contract. They can accumulate up to 1,400 hours of paid sick time, which is about 2 years, earned at a rate of 10.5 hours per month. And they also have access to a sick bank after the exhaustion of personal sick leave time paid for by the employer to a maximum grant of 3,640 hours during the tenure of their employment. And even though it's not in the collective agreement, since October 2022, most CUPE Local 486 members have worked a 4-day compressed work week, allowing them to take every Friday off, with the exception of PSDC operators as they work shift work. So on to benchmarking. CUPE Local 486 outperformed the wage increases of other groups during the period of their last collective agreement for the years 2015 to 2021. This slide shows Inside Workers' cumulative wage increases from 2015 to 2021, benchmarked to New Brunswick CPI, local 18 wage increases, management wage increases, and the city's tax base for the same period. Local 486 is the red line on the graph with a cumulative wage increase of 15.75% from 2015 to 2021. During a period of time when the city's cumulative tax base growth over that same period in green was only 7.81%, contributing to structural deficit issues as I referred earlier in the presentation. New Brunswick CPI was also lower during this time frame at 12.54%. And also falling under was Management Group with a cumulative 9.61% and Local 18 with 13.50%. The concluding message for this slide is Inside Workers received wage escalation rates above city affordability, above inflation, and above other employee groups during the period of 2015 to 2021. If we compare the cumulative Local 486 wage increases from 2015 to 2023, assuming the city's offer for the years 2022 and 2023, it will place Local 486 cumulative increases for 2015 to 2023 at 21.1%. This is the red line on the graph. Compare this to the city's 3-year rolling tax base over the same period, which is the blue line, which is the calculation of the wage escalation policy. That cumulative rolling tax base for that same period is 15.67%, meaning Inside Workers would still be 5.3% higher than the cumulative wage escalation rates during this time frame, which is one measure of the city's affordability. Management and NBCPI are also included on this slide. And this table is just the data that supports the previous slide. So you can see for all those years, the first column is the 3-year rolling tax base of the city. The second column is the Local 486 wage increases and the differences. You can see other than in 2022, where the city is offering a one-time $5,000 payment, CUPE Local 486 member wage increases exceeded or was equivalent to the city's rolling 3-year tax base growth. And over the overall period exceeded by 5.44%. If you compare Local 486 wage packages, including the negotiated contract for 2016 to 2021, in addition to the city offer for the years 2022 to 2026, to the most recent and previous negotiated teachers' contracts as a benchmark, Local 486 cumulative wage increases during this period would be 25.55% with the city's offer, compared to 16.15% for the teachers' 2 collective agreements. The line in the middle up to 2023 are the cumulative management wage increases from 2016 to 2023 at 13.96%. We also looked at turnover rates for CUPE 486. The blue bar is what HR indicates as a measure of healthy turnover and the orange bar is the actual turnover experienced in Local 486 membership. Actual turnover is below the benchmark for healthy turnover during a very competitive and advantageous employee market. And this may be an indicator of either very high job satisfaction or that the city wage and benefit packages are very competitive. Finally, we need to remember, although the city received a healthy tax base growth, very healthy tax base growth for 2022 and 2023, most of that growth has been in market adjustments and is at risk of future fluctuation. For example, in 2023, the city's tax base growth was 8.76%. It's green bar on the right. But if you look at new construction, new builds, real growth, only 1.35% of that growth was actually in new construction. The rest of that growth was in market adjustment. So we talked about the wage escalation policy. We talked about benchmarking. Let's talk about, does the city have slush funds? The city absolutely does not have slush funds. I take exception to the word slush funds, as it is a derogatory word and is intended to imply there are hidden or discretionary funds available to pay a workforce, and that just simply is not the case. The city's reserve funds are governed by a policy approved by Common Council, and reserve funds play a key part in meeting the goals of the city's long-term financial plan and growth objectives. City of St. John reserve funds are also the lowest amongst New Brunswick's 3 biggest cities. This slide benchmarks St. John's reserve funds to Moncton and Fredericton. St. John has approximately $37 million in combined operating and capital reserve funds in the general fund and in St. John Water. As a comparison, in Moncton, in their audited financial statements, they present $104 million in combined reserve funds, and Fredericton is reporting approximately $47 million in reserve funds. Again, all 3 cities, St. John, Moncton, and Fredericton, are based on the audited 2022 financial statements. The reserve fund policy prescribes the specific uses of our reserve funds, which is for one-time uses, such as to mitigate the risk of costs associated with unforeseen events, such as severe weather events, to fund major capital renewal to avoid new debt, such as the case of saving up for a multiplex, or to save up to invest in growth opportunities, and to fund the infrastructure deficit. Reserve funds are not appropriate to pay wage and benefit expenses or any other annual operating expenses because those expenses require funding every single year. Whereas once you spend a reserve fund, it's gone forever. Reserve funds are also very transparent. They're reported, as I said, in the city's audited financial statements for the public to see, and all transfers into a reserve fund and all transfers out of a reserve fund require a resolution of Common Council in open session. Staff cannot put money into reserve funds or take money out of reserve funds without bringing that forward to Common Council. So let's go into what's in them. For operating reserves, per our audited financial statements, the city has $7.4 million in operating reserves approved by council and are designated to mitigate operating risk or to fund one-time growth initiatives. Some of these reserves you can see on the slide include Severe Weather Reserve Fund, a WorkSafe New Brunswick Premium Fluctuation Fund, COVID Reserve Funds, one time, a St. John Energy Reserve for tax rate stabilization that's premised in an agreement with St. John Energy, one-time funding for projects such as city's commitment to the St. John Theatre Company. So you can see they're all one-time in nature. With respect to the Capital Reserve Fund, the city has approximately $19 million in the Capital Reserve Fund. But over $10 million of this capital reserve is from a program that has been in place for over a decade at the city, which is the Fleet and Computer Replacement Program, that allows the city to replace assets without needing to lever debt. These funds have built up due to supply chain issues and difficulty sourcing replacement assets. And we expect these balances to deplete as we begin investing again and the market opens back up. $2 million of this capital reserve is from the windup of 2 former city entities, the windup of Develop St. John, which also housed the former St. John Industrial Parks, and also the windup of Discover St. John, both one-time funds, and they've been set aside and approved and reserved by council to be used for specific purposes, such as the Strategic Land Reserve. There are also one-time funds from other levels of government set aside to address capital needs, infrastructure deficit, the North Depot relocation project, and the transit facility. St. John Water also has reserve funds. They've got operating reserves of $2.3 million, potable rate stabilization reserve of $1.1 million, an industrial rate stabilization reserve of $1.2 million, and then for capital reserves, St. John Water has an infrastructure deficit that's near $250 million, so we don't have a lot of capital reserves, but it's a good start. We've got a fleet replacement reserve of $2.3 million, industrial capital reserve of $2.7 million. That's made up of rates that's collected from industry, not rates collected from potable customers, and then a potable capital reserve fund for $3.3 million. So in conclusion, City of St. John offered to QP Local 486 is fully compliant with the wage escalation policy. The city's July 26 offer benchmarks favorably to other city groups. And the city does not have slush funds. The city has reserve funds. And they're lower than Moncton and Fredericton. They have strong governance with oversight through a reserve fund policy, recommendations from Finance Committee, and through Common Council. They are completely transparent, as all transfers in and out require council resolution in open session, and they're audited. And finally, they're not appropriate to be used to fund annual operating expenses like wages and benefits, because again, they're one-time only, and they're for one-time only purposes. With that, that concludes my presentation.